So, in part 10, we're going to look at security. Security is obviously extremely important in any network, especially in the Wi-Fi. So, one major consideration for security is guest Wi-Fi, and everybody needs a guest Wi-Fi. Hotels, restaurants, parks, airports, shopping malls, retail stores. But you want to keep those people off your network. And the first option, which is the most expensive, is to have a completely separate physical network, even down to the internet connection. And that's something that hotels do in many cases. The second option, of course, is to put a guest Wi-Fi on your corporate network. And so now you've got the same access points and switches and controllers being used for the corporate network and the guest Wi-Fi. The guest Wi-Fi is just a separate SSID, so it just says guest or whatever it says, and the guests know they can connect to it. So the guest Wi-Fi may require authentication, it may not. For example, it may ask for your hotel room number and your name. It may ask for a credit card to let you on. This all gets handled by the application server. So keeping in mind that each SSID can be associated with a specific WLAN, and each WLAN can be associated with a specific VLAN. So you can keep different SSID traffic separate on your network. And next situation, of course, is to encrypt the traffic between the device and the access point, so that a access point and the device don't get ratted out by a packet sniffer. And there are many different encryption options: WPA, TKIP, CCMP. There are some options you should not use, like WEP or Cisco Leap. They've been cracked. The other options that I told you probably gonna get cracked soon too, because everything gets cracked eventually, and then they come out with something better. So it's important to use the best available technology that's been proven to work. Authentication is not the same as encryption, but it can be. Authentication means that we are verifying the identity of the person who's connecting to our network. So, in a very simple authentication method, there's a Wi-Fi password. You have to put your password in to get on the Wi-Fi. That's not a very good solution in a large network. If you've got 2,000 employees and they all know the same Wi-Fi password, they're gonna tell their friends. The other option, of course, is since every device has a unique MAC address, you can prohibit, or you can have a whitelist of permitted MAC addresses that can connect to your network. Of course, then every physical device has to be registered with the IT department before it can access the network. Maybe you want to audit devices that come in. You don't want to let users bring their own devices, and so MAC address authentication may be something that you want to consider. Otherwise, it can be very irritating, and of course, like many other things, it's possible to fake your MAC address. So, the IEEE sets all the different standards, and they set standards for Wi-Fi, and 802.1x is the current authentication standard for Wi-Fi. And they talk about EAP, which is a extensible authentication protocol and their standard. And EAP is not the authentication itself, it's just the carrier. It carries the data that the device uses to authenticate itself with the network. So if you're required to get on the network by entering in your username or password or a certificate, then EAP is handling that information. But EAP doesn't encrypt some of that information, so they came out with PEAP, which is protected EAP, and it encrypts the information that EAP carries. So I need to again emphasize that EAP is just the transportation mechanism. It's not the mechanism itself. So your phone connects to a server to talk to it and decide, and the server decides if the phone can get onto the network, and the server says, give me your username and password, or give me your certificate. And this conversation is being transmitted between the device and the server through EAP. But the way that the device and the server have their conversation is defined by the mechanism. And there are many choices for mechanisms that work over EAP. So there's MD5, there's OTC, there's GTC, there's TLS, and TLS is the best. And the reason that TLS is the best is because of authentication, and most mechanisms authenticate only the device. And what I mean by that is with MD5, for example, the server is checking to make sure that the phone or the computer or whatever is authorized to connect to the network. And like, so what? Well, here's a question. What if I was a hacker and I set up my own Wi-Fi network in your office and gave it the same name, and it looks like a legitimate network, and your phone connects to it. Now your phone doesn't know the difference, and there's no way for the network to prove that it's legitimate. But on EAP TLS, the server has to prove to the device that it's a legitimate network. So the device proves to the network that it's a legitimate device and it's authorized to connect, and the network proves to the device that it's a legitimate network. So there's a two-way authentication. Both parties understand each other, and we avoid this thing that we call honeypot, which we're going to talk about later. And it's very important. Again, I can't emphasize it enough. The client won't authenticate a fake network if it's using EAP TLS until somebody finds a way to crack it, which they probably will in a few years, but by then we'll have something better. And of course, some people want to use Active Directory. They want to authenticate to the network with their Active Directory account. You can run Network Policy Server on the Windows Server. If you do that, then a group policy and the features that apply will get applied to the user connecting to your network. So, what happens when somebody gets an access point and plugs it into a network jack on your wall inside your building, and now you've got a rogue AP? Well, it's pretty easy to stop them if you've applied proper port security on your switches. Guess what? That AP has a MAC address. That MAC address is not authorized to connect to that port on that switch. Which hopefully, if you've got a jack on the wall, then it's hopefully either not patched in or that port is shut down. Of course, a hacker could come in and say, find a network device that's plugged in, read its MAC address, and then use an AP that he's spoofed the same MAC address as the one that's plugged in, and he can plug that AP into the network. There are ways to detect that as well. Since the other device is hopefully not an AP, it's a laptop or a phone or something, now you've got a problem. Of course, the more serious problem is a honeypot, which I just talked about, but I'm going to tell you in more detail. So, let's say your SSID is enterprise network, and you have 100 access points and like 2,000 devices. So, I'm a hacker. I want to steal somebody's login information. How do I do that? Well, I buy an access point and I buy a power injector and I program the access point to be called enterprise network. So it's the same SSID as your network. And I put the access point in my backpack or in a parking lot or, wherever. Or maybe I'm a disgruntled employee, then I bring my backpack to work and stick it under my desk. And now you've got a whole bunch of legitimate access points and one fake one. But the people walking into your office with their cell phones and their laptops and their mobile phones and whatever, connecting to the Wi-Fi, their phone just connects to the access point with the strongest signal. Some of those are my access points. Some of them are legitimate and one of them is fake. But they have the same SSID, so as far as the phone is concerned, or the laptop is concerned, they're exactly the same. And so a whole bunch of your devices are going to connect to my access point. And when they do, I just stick them with a fake looking website that looks like, I just stick your logo on it. Most people are stupid, so it's pretty easy to make a website that looks semi-legitimate and people will stick their username and password on it, and now I've got their username and password, and I can come back later and connect to your network and steal all your data. And of course, I can do many other things since I own that AP. I can control pretty much any network resource I want and do whatever I want. Of course, it's preventable. How do you prevent it? Well, make your SSID hidden. So if you have a corporate network, you can put your guest network as public, and you can hide your enterprise network, and you can give it a completely random, ridiculous name, and then employees will have to enter the SSID to even get on the network. Of course, this is not foolproof because it can be leaked, and then the hacker knows the SSID. Or if he's a rogue employee, then that's a pretty easy thing to do. We've also got, again, EAP TLS, which I just went over. And the EAP TLS says, hey, the Wi-Fi network has to prove that it's a legitimate network before the device connects. So, if you connect to the Honeypot doesn't have the same legitimate certificate as a corporate network, so a phone or laptop will will recognize that this is an illegitimate network and it won't connect. Of course, it still will connect because laptops can connect to unsecured networks too. And the only way to enforce the policy is to use, a Windows group policy or a Meraki device manager and force each device to connect only to a network authenticated by EAP TLS, and also force them to only connect to your network and not to random public networks. So we can educate users, we can tell them about the Honeypot. It doesn't always inspire confidence that we've got a honeypot in a building, and it's not very effective because this is a pretty sophisticated attack. We've also got RF shielding, which can keep Wi-Fi signals from getting into or out of your building. Obviously, that's not effective if the hacker brought the access point into the lobby or into one of your offices, which is totally doable. Physical security, you can search bags and make sure people don't bring access points into your building. Of course, how practical is that really? You get packages all the time. I highly doubt that a typical company is going to be able to keep a rogue access point from getting into the building. It ain't gonna happen. Of course, RRM can detect rogue APs even if they're not plugged into your network, and it can generally tell you the area, and then you can use that to locate the access point in the building and physically search for it and take it away. RF shielding is basically just paint, and it keeps Wi-Fi signals from passing through a wall covered in the paint. It's also like a for Windows, it's like a polycarbonate or a plastic film that goes on the Windows. Yeah, so it can keep devices from joining the network. So people walking down the sidewalk, they're not going to see your network. It can cut the signal down by as much as 30 decibels. Of course, it's kind of useless if you have a Wi-Fi in the yard or in the parking lot outside, and it doesn't really help when you have visitors who are in your lobby or in reception or in your building. So for the most part, it's basically just a waste of money. I don't recommend RF shielding, and it's certainly not a substitute for the other security options that you definitely need to implement. Of course, physical security is important too. So, how do you keep your APs safe? Well, one way is to install them above the ceiling tiles where people can't steal them. People will just steal them and sell them, or people will try to log in and reset them and then make them do bad things. So why would you install access points above the ceiling tile? Sometimes a client wants it because they don't want to see access points. Ceiling tiles don't block a signal very well, so it has almost no effect on the signal. Don't worry about that. Even drywall doesn't block it too much. So if you've got access panels in the drywall ceiling, you can install APs up there. There are many brackets that you can buy for access points that let you lock the access point to the bracket, and locking it also not only prevents it from being removed, it makes it a lot more difficult to access the Ethernet port or the console port. Not impossible, but much more difficult. You can disable console access from the configuration if you want. You can also, put some glue or something in the console port to keep people from plugging console cables in. Vigilance is important too. You don't want to see some random guy in your hallway plugging a console cable into an access point and hammering away on his laptop without being confronted. So say, hey, who do you think you are? You're not the IT guy. When we do penetration testing, though, we find that most companies suck at being able to challenge people like that, and lock everything up as best as you can. IDFs, MDFs, anywhere that has network equipment. So, you can buy a trip light cabinet or whatever and bolt it to the wall and lock it. That's made of glass, and the keys are all the same. So you're basically, it's locked against some casual person walking in, but people can get the keys and get in if they need to. So think about, actual security, cameras, motion sensors, alarms, doors, biometrics, man-trap doors that only let one person in at a time. Again, it's a cost-benefit analysis. Depends on the kind of company that you have and the value of your data. And of course, consider DDoS, which we're not gonna fully explain. But if you think of it, for Wi-Fi, DDoS is basically signal jamming. So a hacker just broadcasts a whole bunch of Wi-Fi packets, and all the devices that are on your network, on your Wi-Fi network, start hearing a device, the packets. So a typical device can't transmit and receive a Wi-Fi signal at the same time. You gotta make the air clear enough. So if there's all these packets coming in, then the device has to listen to all the noise, and that gets really annoying, and you can't really prevent it except, of course, with the shielding paint. But you can identify it by picking up the signal. It's not something that's very common, and of course, on a large network, you can only disrupt a small area unless you have transmitters everywhere, which will probably get noticed